Find a comfortable chair. I think they're fairly comfortable, right? Good to see you all. Good morning again. This is a challenge for me. I often see myself like Jesus only in this regard. I'm a wandering rabbi. Notice he didn't spend much time in the temple. He was out and about. And I like to be out and about, out in the natural world. And so to be positioned, thank you, technology people, so that this can be shared more widely. I'll do my best to behave and stand here and not jump up and down too much so you can see me. So again, thank you for coming. Just a little bit more by way of introduction to who this person is standing before you today. I didn't even realize this as time flies. I was ordained 50 years ago in the fall. Holy cow. How did that happen? Yeah, but blessed to serve in campus ministries, in parish ministries, served teaching at Trinity Lutheran College and at our seminary in Berkeley. And for about 20 plus years, I was the youth ministry coordinator for Region 1, which is Montana, Alaska, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. And so I was talking with some Alaska folks there who worked up in Alaska. That was one of my favorite places to go and visit. And to see the vibrant congregations of our ELCA in very different kinds of settings. So I've been blessed in those, now my 51st year, to have served in the church in a variety of capacities. And now in this third act, as I described it, I'm the paddle pilgrim. It wasn't a title that I chose. I wanted, like Huck Finn, to paddle the Mississippi River. I grew up in the Midwest along the Mississippi River, and I wanted to do that adventure like Huck and Jim did. By the way, I was an English major in college and classical languages. And if you haven't read Huck Finn recently, it is the great American novel. I mean, here's this wonderful, this incredible pair, a throwaway white boy and a black runaway slave traveling on a raft down the Mississippi in the mid-19th century, commenting on our country. Now, if we think we're a mess now, read Huck Finn, and you'll see what a mess our country was then. So we keep praying, we keep reading. And so I wanted to go down the river. So I launched my kayak from Lake Itasca. Have any of you been to Lake Itasca in northern Minnesota? Yeah, way up there. And I paddled 2,350 miles all the way down the Mississippi over 2 months. And I had to make it in 2 months because there was an ELCA youth gathering, kind of like this next summer. And I was one of the speakers. So if I didn't show up and they said, and here's Dave Ellingson, I would have been in big trouble. So one day I had to paddle 90 miles in Mississippi, and it was 115 degrees. And it was, I froze in the north in Minnesota, and I cooked in the south. But it was an adventure of a lifetime. And I was writing up in my blog about this adventure because you lose track of what's Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. And when I got back home, I looked at my blog and I said, this is almost a book. And so I added the stories that I didn't dare blog about because my wife would have freaked out. The near-death experiences I had along the Mississippi River. And so I added that, and I added pictures, and I had to come up with a title. And one of my friends, one of my former students, said, "You're the paddle pilgrim." I said, "Okay, I like that." And so that has launched me literally and figuratively on a 10-year journey, as I said, down the Erie Canal and Hudson River to the Statue of Liberty. I lived along the Hudson as a boy, to the fjords of Norway because my ancestry is Norwegian. And then most recently in March, I paddled again in 100-degree days on the Mekong River in Southeast Asia through Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Well, since I found I love to adventure writing as a genre, if you will, I just kept writing in my blog and my log, and it became books. So there's a number of books up here that if you're interested afterwards, autograph and write something really nice about you. You could even dictate to me what you want me to say about you or your husband or your wife. And then there's two other books on the very outside. The closest, the white book with the animals on the front, is a children's book, which was inspired by becoming a grandfather 5 times. I told stories to my kids when they were growing up, but I never wrote them down. And my son said, "Dad, did you write those stories down?" I said, "No, I made them up." "Did you make up stories?" Right? We all do. And so I wrote them, and then I had a friend illustrate them. And so that book is there. And then the far corner, in honor to my mom, who's an English teacher, I've written a book of poetry, and I've illustrated it with friends' illustrations and photographs. I love to do photography. So there are paddle pilgrim books up there. And the one in particular you're going to hear about today is the one called Headwaters, Paddling Through Climate Change. So without further ado, my partner up here will hit the button. I also am a filmmaker. So you're going to get to see a film on the adventure in the Headwaters.
The mighty Mississippi, the father of waters, begins as a modest stream. Native people say it begins with a drop of water from the beak of a bird high in a tree. Winter snow and summer rain and springs bubbling up out of the ground all flow together and create what is known as the headwaters. Wildlife is abundant. The river traces a serpentine path with many twists and turns. The headwaters are beautiful and peaceful, nature's great and holy cathedral. For generations, people have been drawn to this waterway. The river has drawn explorers like Henry Schoolcraft, who identified the source of the Mississippi River at Lake Itasca. It has drawn entrepreneurs who logged the verdant forest. And indigenous peoples were drawn by an ancient prophecy to these holy waters, waters that has sustained their way of life for thousands of years.
So when we talk about the headwaters, it's very important for us as Ojibwe people because it not only represents our food supply with fishing and Monoman. Our prophecy was that when we followed this Migas shell through different areas of the riverway and then into Lake Superior and then finally over here, it was told that we would be well established in a land where the food grows on the water, and that is here in this region.
For scientists, the headwaters are a living laboratory.
When I think of the upper Mississippi, I think of all the ways that both people and wildlife, all the biodiversity around us connect on these transitions between land and water. I think of meandering, connected, gradual transition and all the species that need both land and water during different parts of their life. So I find there's just so much more to discover and figure out in all the complexity of the river. One thing that I love about the river is that it's like a main street for America because it connects us all along the continent, north to south.
As soon as I think of the Mississippi, I think of my childhood growing up on it, fishing, boating, swimming. As a scientist now today, it's that appreciation built from when I was a little kid to also understanding how interesting this place is from a scientific perspective, that we have this sort of natural sandbox to build models for how these rivers evolve through time. It becomes incredibly important when you start thinking about modern environmental issues.
The Mississippi River has meant a lot to me. I'm Dave Ellingson, the paddle pilgrim.
Tranquility.
I love the outdoors and paddling my kayak as I explore the natural world. About 10 years ago, I paddled over 2,000 miles on my Huck Finn adventure on the Mississippi, down America's Main Street to New Orleans. And I saw how the river was a flyway for millions of birds, a home for hundreds of varieties of fish, a highway for billions of dollars in commerce, and a source of inspiration. For our team of adventure paddlers, Jim Lewis, Ellen McDonough, and me, a return to the Headwaters was a homecoming for good friends. Each of us has paddled the entire Mississippi, but we heard the call to return to our favorite stretch of the river, to savor the scenery, enjoy the wildlife, and renew our spirits. All adventurers, especially paddlers, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Our plan was to launch in early June to avoid midsummer heat, humidity, and mosquitoes. It's always great to meet fellow paddlers. And as we started out, we ran into two guys canoeing the Headwaters. We wished them well, but then heard something no paddler wants to hear. A canoe scraping bottom, low water, a not so subtle hint of what was ahead. We decided to start further downstream on several large lakes. The skies were blue and sun bright, and we launched near Bemidji. But it was getting warm out. No, it was hot, 100 degrees hot. On the water it was bearable, but once we stopped to camp, the heat and the bugs were overpowering.
3 high-temperature records were set in the Twin Cities this week, and hundreds of records were toppled statewide. Simply put, it's been the warmest start to June in Minnesota history.
So the summer of 2021 was no joke. As you look at the rates of warming, not only since the beginning of the 20th century or since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but even in just the last 50 years or so. Some of the fastest warming rates are in the northern parts of Minnesota, and that includes the Headwaters region.
But we kept going. One of the parts I love best in our adventures together is setting up camp and sitting around eating and swapping tales. Ellen would complain that our laughing often made her stomach hurt.
Well, when we got into our respective tents that night, we were really hot. As I laid sweating in a pool of sweat, I felt this cool breeze coming in from around me when actually there was no breeze in sight outside. The mosquitoes were fanning me in my tent. I was actually grateful to be fanned by mosquitoes. So I guess it wasn't all bad.
We paddled on. You could almost see the water level going down. The boat launches we used to get out of our kayaks were now almost 5 feet above the water.
We paddled long hours looking for access to the shore where we could set up a tent or whatever to get relief from the heat. And what I learned was don't trust David to hold the boat. We'd been in the kayak for hours, so my legs were kind of wobbly. So I asked David to pull up beside me and stabilize my kayak while I got out. And as I was getting out, and I realized my legs were widening, I was doing some sort of circus maneuver, and David was nowhere near me. He was out in the middle of the river. He drifted away, didn't say a word.
Growing up here, I don't honestly recall seeing what I saw in the summer of 2021, where I saw waterfalls completely dry that have, as long as I've known them, have been flowing. I saw rivers at record low levels. Probably we're going to see things like this into the future.
going in early June, you should have had optimal water conditions, and you had really terrible water conditions. And my guess is that whatever flow you saw was groundwater, it wasn't even from the surface. And I think that's a climate change issue.
As outdoor adventurers, we were experiencing firsthand climate change. And this journey confirmed what scientists have predicted. As the water level kept falling, we were witnessing in real time a mini Grand Canyon being sculpted in mud banks, exposing holes where muskrats and otters and beavers once lived. I wrote in my journal one evening, "The whole creation is groaning. The natural world is suffering." We paddlers were tough, and had even paddled the fjords of Norway together. But this was a different story. Our spirits were sagging, and we wondered if we should hang up our paddles. But the river, the land, the trees were suffering too. The Headwaters had called us to return, and it felt like they were trying to tell us something and become our teacher. As I lay sweating in my tent one night, a song written by a paddler-musician friend played in my mind. The lyrics kept echoing.
I can't help but think this river has more, so much more wisdom than It always knows what it's supposed to do. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do that too? The river just flows, the river just goes.
On our journey, I had met a 9-year-old Ojibwe girl named Naomi. As we stood together by the river near Palisade, she pointed across the water to where all the trees had been cut down for an oil pipeline. She asked me, "Where will the animals live?" Naomi is part of a group called the Water Protectors, who are trying to stop the Enbridge oil pipeline. This pipeline crisscrosses the region and poses a major environmental threat to Ojibwe tribal lands and waters. The goal of the Water Protectors is to protect, protest, and pray. Naomi and the Water Protector children had created posters which encourage us to listen to the animals and make their voices heard to protect their homes. Native peoples are joining the growing chorus of voices to honor treaties, protect the water and land, and care for creation.
There are some that I know who are Ojibwe women in the area, and they're from the area around Grand Rapids. And what happens with them is every Sunday they get together and they sing songs and they put out their tobacco and they pray for the river. We still stand here today protecting our lands, protecting our waterways. We do this because we have a spiritual investment in all that is around us, and we offer our prayers to our Mother Earth because that's who we are as Ojibwe people. We understand who we are in the universe with our feet planted firmly on the ground and our hands in the air. We are the people who connect all lands and skies here in our earth realm.
I remember an Ojibwe prayer. Grandfather, Sacred One, teach us love, compassion, and honor, that we may heal the earth and heal each other. Protecting the earth can take many forms, such as through public policy. The state of Minnesota has led the way through its Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment to the state constitution that uses a small percentage of the sales tax to protect, enhance, and restore Minnesota's lakes, rivers, streams, and groundwater.
The Mississippi and the rivers that flow through it, the landscapes that are here, are incredibly beautiful places, but they're also incredibly sort of delicate places. And I think if we're conscientious and we are ambitious enough to think about how to live within them in this sort of symbiotic relationship, we can preserve those landscapes and the waters themselves for generations. And we need to be proactive about it.
I'm optimistic about Minnesota because of what Minnesotans believe in general and what they're doing already.
I guess my little contribution to try and ease some of these problems are that my family, we try to buy new as infrequently as possible and to purchase, when possible, used goods, things that don't require manufacturing. I also ride a bicycle to work whenever I can, including in the winter.
Personally, I'm trying to fly less, and so I want to use the recreation opportunities, the chances to enjoy nature closer to home rather than flying to exotic places. And so I really come to appreciate the chance to connect with nature right within a bike ride from home.
I think if I can do the same sort of thing my father did, which was take me to these places, show me these places, and get me to understand and appreciate what they are and why they're important. If I can at least do that with my kids, I would feel very good about being a good dad. But I want them to have the experience I did, right? Growing up fishing and swimming and boating. I want them to have that experience because through that, I think they'll appreciate how beautiful these places really are, especially the Mississippi and what that means for this entire region.
For Jim, Ellen, and me, our Headwaters paddle was eye-opening. This was the main street of America. Much needs to be done, but as individuals and together, we can make a difference. The Mississippi Headwaters are a classroom and a cathedral. The bells are ringing and calling us to action to care for the Father of Waters and Mother Earth. First of all, we just have to start talking about it. Talk to your friends and neighbors, and vote. Become a water protector where you live. Involve your children. Go down to the river and pray. Our actions will all add up. Like the drop of water from the beak of a bird high in a tree that falls and grows into the mighty Mississippi. Roll on, mighty waters.
Just flows, river just goes. It's bigger than us, you just have to trust it'll take us where we're meant to go. The river just flows, the river just knows. No matter how the world turns or where the wind blows, it has its own direction to go. The river just flows. The river just flows.
Thank you, Marco. Happy to answer any questions or hear any comments you may have about what you heard, what you saw on this adventure in the headwaters of the mighty Mississippi. Questions, comments? Yes.
Well, start with. Right, a couple questions.
Sure.
What do you think the human population of the planet is today?
I bet you know. And it is?
8 billion.
Okay.
Do you know what it was in one man's lifetime, 70 years?
It is?
1.8 billion.
Okay. I have a feeling there's going to be an additional question and comment.
Well, if I can keep my mind focused.
Okay.
So my observation and conclusion is that there are going to be too many people on the planet to sustain the planet. Now, I also would suggest a federal regulation that could help us achieve our goal of diminished population growth. And that would involve voluntary cooperation by couples, whereby your first 2 children, you get what we get now, a credit or deduction on your income tax. If you have a third, you don't get that deduction.
Okay.
And if you have further, say 4 or 5, then you pay the government X amount of dollars per year for X years, maybe 18, to help encourage a different direction and to control growth.
Thank you very much for your comment. And when I was doing my doctoral work in California at Claremont, my lead teacher had a pie that he created. And there were slivers in it that addressed the issue of the climate and change. One of those slivers was population. I mean, the population bomb was that the book back when some of us were fairly young, zeroed in on that. And I think population is clearly one of the issues, although the Chinese haven't done it particularly well. Now they have the problem of too few people to work many of their industries. So I would agree with you, but then you have to add in all the other elements to relate to a very complex issue. The issue of climate change is not one issue, it's many issues. And one of them is the use of fossil fuels, right? So we need to address that, and I'm glad to see more things are being done. I've been driving an electric car for 10 years and love it. And I just actually read yesterday that Ford Motors, which makes big trucks, that's how they make money, Ford, that their electric truck has done very well. So that's going to encourage, hopefully, the automakers and those who produce vehicles, because I think there's some naysayers or skeptics maybe who think, oh, electric cars are not. Well, electric cars are not going to solve the problem. It's one of the slivers of the pie. When you begin looking at this, this particular film was nominated and will be in a film festival in Iowa, which is actually my home state. My farm relatives came in the 1850s. And so there's a film festival there called Farm to Film Fest. And they saw my film at another festival and they want to show it. And so I looked at this, and it's all sorts of agricultural issues that are other slivers to the pie. Because when I went down the mighty Mississippi, most of the pollution in the Mississippi is not industrial pollution. Interestingly enough, in the 60s, under Richard Nixon, the Clean Water Act legislation, public policy, has cleaned up a lot of the industrial pollution. There's still plenty. But what's the major source of pollution in the Mississippi? Agricultural pollution, phosphorus and nitrogen fertilizers. So I appreciate your thought, and we have to do it. It'll be interesting to see how various countries, many of which are authoritarian, who can probably say this is going to happen. But within democratic countries, I can just hear the hue and cry about telling people how many kids, although the tax incentive might get a few winners. So it might help. Yes. Another question or comment?
When you ate, did you fish and ate the fish?
We did not. We brought along freeze-dried food. I happen to be a vegetarian, which is part of my addressing of the issue. It relates to all of this. And so we brought along freeze-dried food. And one of the lessons I learned when I paddled the whole Mississippi in 2010 was, or 2013, was that if you see a casino, you stop. I'm not a gambler, but let me tell you, you plunk down $10 at the feed, and I would fill up a table full of just desserts. And when you paddle as much as I paddled, right? No guilt, smorgasbord time. Right? So for me, if there was a restaurant or bistro along the way, we would always stop. Now, part of the joy of that was not just the food, but meeting the people. I mean, the people along the way. I could tell you story after story. I'll tell you a real quick one. In Guttenberg, Iowa, I stopped. It's a little river town where they used to make buttons from oyster shells. And the factory is still there. And the sandy beach I was on was sand made from oyster shell button residue, right? And I was paddling in and I saw a man standing next to the shack. And I said, "Hi, I'm Dave. I'm paddling the whole Mississippi. Is there a place I can camp?" I figured maybe he'd let me camp on his beach. He said, "Oh, no problem. You can use my fishing shack." Well, it turns out he was the mayor of the town. I went to church with him the next morning. He was a retired school teacher. And I met him at a major conference in Rock Island, Illinois, 2 years later. And we're friends. I mean, some of these people who didn't save my life, but certainly made my life, I call them river angels or fjord angels or, you know, whatever they are. They're God's instruments. And I really believe that there are angels all around us. Now, here's one of my majors in college was Greek. When you think of an angel, what do you think of? Those little Renaissance art Cupid dolls with the rosy cheeks and tiny little wings. They could never fly, you know. Think about it. Angelos. What does angelos mean? Any idea? Pastor Deb, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you remember?
Messenger.
Exactly. It means messenger. Now that means that all of us can be and are messengers. Wow. Isn't it? That changes everything. Right? And so you have messages from Epiphany. You've seen God's presence today heard in music and in a story. You could go tell the story, right? This week, because you're angels. And I met lots of angels along the way, so I'm very grateful. And one of the essays I wrote in my first Mississippi book was started with, "Do you talk to dead people?" And as I was paddling along, I saw the clouds above the river, and I thought of the passage in Hebrews. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us cast off that which would hold us back and run the race that is set before us, keeping our eyes on Christ Jesus," right? And I thought, cloud of witnesses, clouds in the sky, communion of saints. And I wrote an essay that's been very, very popular with a lot of people who, when I asked them, "Do you talk with dead people?" Of course they do. Because we believe that our relatives, our loved ones, are in that cloud of witnesses. And I would say they're in the crowd of witnesses, cheering us on in our adventure in life. So if you haven't talked with your school teacher or your high school coach recently who had an influence on you, just say thanks. Right? And for me, that has been a great lesson that the river has taught me. And the river and the fjords have become my teachers and my cathedral, my place of worship and celebration. So, other questions or comments? Yes.
What's your next trip?
That's a good question. I have two ideas. One is a paddling adventure on the Nile. And immediately people say the crocodiles. Well, if you do a little bit of research, those are in the lakes way, way up closer to the source and not around Luxor and the Valley of the Kings, which is where I want. launch at the dam and then go to Cairo. But I'm a real history buff. So that's one possibility. It turns out there are paddling groups on the Nile. Isn't that great news, right? And so I'll probably rent and have several friends who've already told me, if you go to Egypt, I want to go. Right? So I'll have paddle friends along with me. The other one, which is totally different, when we were in Vietnam eating some great pho. Oh, I love the food on my trip in Southeast Asia. Amazing, amazing place and people. I thought, I'm thinking I might want to try being a peddler because I like to bike. I take the interurban trail very often where I live in Edmonds, and I come all the way up here to Everett, turn around and go back. I actually paddled yesterday, 37 degrees. I put a lot of layers on, right? It was so good to be out in fresh air. So I thought, there's a road that goes twisting and turning all the way down the Mississippi River called the River Road. So I'm hustling several bike companies to be my corporate sponsors, because when I went to Southeast Asia, I had a corporate sponsor for my kayaks and my paddles. Werner Paddles, made out here in Monroe, supplied beautiful paddles for us. So I'm hoping that I think I'm actually kind of leaning more in this direction. An electric bike, I have an electric bike. Any electric bikers here? If you haven't tried it, isn't it great? Yeah. I just love to, if I need a little extra energy, I go up the hill, right? So I'm hoping that I can do that and paddle. And it turns out when I was doing research with Trek bikes, which are made in Wisconsin, I'm going to be back speaking in Wisconsin, a big event in March. They're made in Wisconsin. And I found out that, Bo Jackson, the great baseball player a number of years ago, in his retirement, he's created a foundation. He is a serious bicycle rider. And he gives away bikes and provides bikes for urban kids. And he does ride-alongs with them. So I'm reaching out to this company and saying, I'm going to pedal, the pedal pilgrim going down the Mississippi. And how about a ride-along in Minneapolis, and a ride-along in St. Louis, and a ride-along in Memphis, and a ride-along in New Orleans? Haven't heard back yet. But if that happens, and you have all these wonderful cities, river towns along the way, a lot of Native American history in the upper Mississippi, Civil War history, which I'm a real Civil War history buff. So I'm hoping that might be, but who knows? Somebody might say, have you ever thought of this? And that's where it all began. The Snake, several people, and I've been up and down the Snake in the power boats. Right? And have you paddled the Snake? Where would you suggest? What stretch is?
Our conversation, right, around energy.
Yes.
And,
it's funny how I've gone elsewhere. There's the Columbia River, and here are all these. I've paddled a lot of the rivers in this area and continue to and will. But something about going somewhere else and the adventure, seeing another part of the world. And the Mekong adventure was incredible. If you have any of you traveled to Southeast Asia, how was it? Were you on a cruise or were you on your own? You were on a cruise, yeah. Viking cruises? Was it Viking?
No.
Norwegian, okay. Norwegian, Viking. I don't know if Hurtigruten does the cruises there, but they're wonderful on the Mekong River, and they build boats. Was your boat sort of looking like a little bit like the local craft? No. Oh, you were okay. All right, but you got to see and you got to eat and experience. So I feel like I work for the tourist agency in Southeast Asia, but the Laotian people, the Cambodian people, the Vietnamese people. Part of my journey, and I've got a film. I'd be glad to come back and show it sometime on the Mekong experience. And part of my journey, it's 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War. And part of my journey was to find out what do these folks think of us, right? And a little bit of a sneak peek. They love us. They've forgotten. Now, I'm sure there's some old Viet Cong soldiers who are mad, and we certainly know a lot of American vets who are struggling still, right? But the people were very gracious. They have a mixed economy. They have a communist leader and government, but they're a mixed economy. Aren't we all mixed economies these days? When you look at the world, gracious, the food, oh, it's It's the best, and it's cheap. Now, Norwegian Lutheran, you know, if it's cheap and it tastes good, you know, I'm there, right? And the street food, oh my goodness, they have these little cafes on the street. Don't go into a restaurant. Go into the little cafes on the street, and grandma's out there cutting things up, and grandpa, and they're all mixing the kids, and there's 2 tables. And this, yes. Oh, I didn't. No. We always made sure it was cooked. Right. Yes. But $1.50, $2 for dinner. We stayed in a number of hotels. We camped on islands as well. And the most we spent for a hotel was $30 a night, and it included breakfast. And ecotourism, speaking of ecology and the environment, I worked with a professor at Kanto University, and that's featured in that film. He has created the Mekong Environmental Forum, and they're doing a lot with helping local citizens to create eco-tourist visiting places, where we visited a silk farm where they were making silk. It was just amazing. We visited various pools and ponds where they're growing crabs and shrimp, and they will net them out and they'll cook it right up for you there. And so, a little plug for Southeast Asia. But glad to come back and show that film and speak with you again. But thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your adventuresome spirit. I think Epiphany is such a fitting Sunday that we notice, that we pay attention. Mary Oliver, the great poet, one of my favorites, says, instructions for living: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. That's kind of my life now. That should be our life as followers of Jesus. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. That even helps quiet, conservative, quiet, introverted Norwegians to get excited, right? Okay, so thank you. I will stick around, be glad to autograph a book. Like I say, I'll write something really nice about you or somebody else. But thank you for hosting.